Daniel chapter 5. I'm going to be preaching from the entire chapter this morning. I will maybe not get done. We'll see. But we'll go with whatever God... I have been... I've had 2 weeks to work on this, right? And so this is one of those sermons where, okay, God, take over, because it could go 100 different ways. And I'm just trusting that God will say what he wants to say to us this morning. I think what I ought to do first is just tell the story. For those of you that may not be familiar with it, I'm going to, in a nutshell, tell you what happens here. So Nebuchadnezzar, the king we've been talking about, he is dead. And there's another king in his place, and his name is Belshazzar. And this king named Belshazzar is not like Nebuchadnezzar at all, in that, well, I'll talk about that later. Let's just say he has no respect for the God of heaven. And he's going to have a big old feast, and he's going to invite a bunch of people, and they're going to party, and they're going to drink, and they're going to have a big, grand old time. And during this feast, a hand appears, just a hand, fingers of a man. It kind of reminds me of that show, I'm going to give you my age now, but there was a show where this hand came up, and that was all, was it called Thing? Thing, yes. So is that Adam's Family? Okay. And so it goes, so this hand, well, there's a picture on the wall, on the screen there, and it just writes on the wall during this big party. They're all partying, and then suddenly this hand appears. It's like, whoa, what's going on? And it writes down 3 different words. The first word is repeated twice, and they don't know what it means, and they're scared. They are scared to death. And so they call in all the so-called wise men to come in, and what does this mean? What's just happened? And none of them can tell him. Sound familiar? We've heard that before, right? As we've studied through Daniel. And then they decide, well, let's go call Daniel in here. Daniel knows. Daniel can do it. Keep in mind, Daniel's probably in his 70s by this time, right? And so he's an older man, and he's called in, and frankly, he just lays into King Belshazzar. I think when you get to a certain age, you just don't care anymore. He just lets him have it. And basically he says, let me tell you what's on that wall, and it is not a good interpretation for the king. In fact, in the end, Belshazzar is dead before the night. Have you ever heard the term, the handwriting's on the wall? It comes from this Bible story. Okay? So it's, in other words, God has spoken. It's happened. This is it. This is what's going to happen. And what's going to happen is you'll be dead before the end of the night. And he was. So let's start with verse 1, a very good place to start. King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. So Belshazzar is certainly not Nebuchadnezzar. Most likely he was his grandson and was only acting king while his father, a man named Nabonidus, was absent from the city. Frankly, Belshazzar was a petty pretender. He was one of those that was, well, let's just put it this way. Somebody that probably had everything handed to him. Can we hang on for the second verse for a while? Let's go back to the first verse. Yeah, there you go. So you can see that he's just kind of one of these guys that's had everything handed to him his whole life, and he has not got anything like his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar. It says his father, but in other words, it seems to happen as you hand down power in a family that you can have a great king or a great queen who just really does things big but it seems like the generations that follow just go, and he's one of those. He's got the power, he's got the authority, but Daniel doesn't respect him at all because he's not someone to respect. Now, what are some reasons he might give a great banquet for 1,000? Well, you're a king, right? And you're rich and you're powerful, so This turns into an atmosphere of just arrogant pretense. And it's an image of opulence, because the truth is, listen, history tells us that the enemy of the Babylonians was at the gates of Babylon while they feasted. But they trusted in the gates and they trusted in the walls, that they were fine, there's no problem. Let's just party. Everyone who was anyone was there. But there was at least one person we know wasn't there, and that was Daniel. This was not his crowd, and this was not his scene. What was going on at this party? Matthew 24, 37 through 39 says, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." That is what's happening in the palace. They're eating, they're drinking, having a grand old time, and they haven't got a clue what's about to happen to them. Does that sound familiar? Verse 2. "While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Now, Nebuchadnezzar had stolen these goblets from the temple in Jerusalem before it was destroyed, but he had placed them in a sacred space in one of his temples. This clown, Belshazzar, says, "Go get them. Go get those goblets. We're going to drink our wine from them." Wow. Okay, verse 3. "So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines, drank from them. They profaned the holy." In other words, they disrespected God Almighty. It was like taking shots from communion cups. It was blasphemy. And it's certainly the opposite of reverential fear. No fear of God. But not to worry, because God doesn't see. It doesn't matter. He won't do anything. Drink up. Man, it was in your face. Psalms 94, 7 through 11 through 10 says this, "They say the Lord does not see. The God of Jacob takes no notice. Take notice, you senseless ones among the people, you fools. When will you become wise? Does he who fashioned the ear not hear? Does he who formed the eye not see? Does he who disciplines nations not punish? Does he who teaches mankind lack knowledge? Oh, he sees, and he hears, and he acts." But they don't believe it. They're not concerned about it. They're not worried about it. Number 4, verse 4. "And they drank the wine. They praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone." So they're drinking from the goblets that belong to God Almighty and to his temple. And while they do it, they praise false gods, these gods of stuff, and ignoring the God of heaven. It really is materialism. It's the worship of stuff. Look at all those things. Gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. What are they? Stuff. Created stuff. So they're ignoring or pretending the Creator God does not exist. And they're worshiping the gods of stuff. More, the God of prettier, the God of bigger, the God of newer, the God of better, the God of faster. Why, it's the gods our culture serves. Feast and drink while calamity is right out outside the gates. Verse 5. Suddenly, now I want that word to sink in. Suddenly. Do you know things can change in your life like that? We've all been there, haven't we? You're walking along doing fine, the phone rings, you pick it up, your world just changed. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. Suddenly, the party is over. Drunk, they may have been drunk, but I'll bet they sobered up real fast. Jesus addressed this directly in Luke 12, verse 16 through 20, and he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Suddenly, oh, I'm going to tear my barns down in bigger barns, prettier barns, more impressive barns. And then I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry and take my ease. Not only can the life be snuffed out in a moment, so will the second coming of the Son of Man be a moment. It will be like the lightning flashing from the east to the west, and his coming will be over like that. God has a way of suddenly ending the arrogance, frivolity, and blasphemy, just as he suddenly ended Nebuchadnezzar's, remember this, at ease in my house and happy in my palace. He put an end to that with a terrifying dream, and then eventually it gave him the mind of a beast. Now he confronts Belshazzar with this detached hand writing on a wall that everyone there saw. All these guests that he was trying to impress. The very last verse of the previous chapter 4 Nebuchadnezzar said, after he was restored from being a beast, he said, those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. God is able to humble. Verse 6. His face, that being the king's, turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. Well, not so hot now, are you? Not so impressive now. You're sitting there shaking like a leaf. Now, frankly, some people translate this, and I guess we're just trying to be nice. I'm going to tell you anyway, that this could have been really that he messed himself. Because he got weak, and how embarrassing would that be? In an instant, everything changed. Verse 7, the king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck. And he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Verse 8, then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. Do you ever wonder why they call them the wise men? Have they figured one thing out in all these stories? It's like every time there's something that really comes up, and it's you know what it reminds me? It reminds me of like a clown, a circus of clowns, a parade of clowns. Get the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners, and here they come, and picture them dressed up like clowns, and they're all so serious. You know, we're going to get this figured out, right? While they're all painted up with their whatever and their silly hats and floppy shoes, and They're clowns. They can't do a thing. 1 Corinthians 1:20 says, where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Listen, has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? The clowns. Here come the clowns. It's God who makes the wisdom that we think is so wise. In his mind, it's just foolishness. They're just a parade of clowns. They're pretenders. Frankly, Belshazzar's go-to remedies don't work, and his panic only increases. Now what do I do? And all the nobles around, I don't know. What are we going to do? They can't help us. Well, it's time to call in a woman. Verse 10. You ready? The queen. Now, this is not his wife. This is probably the queen mother. Okay? She wasn't at the party. She's hearing about it, right? The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. May the king live forever, she said. Well, that's silly, because that ain't going to happen. Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. Verse 11, there is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Verse 12, he did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. Well, there may be no answer from the clowns, but there is an answer from God and the man of God. The New American Standard Version uses the words illumination, insight, and wisdom to describe Daniel as the queen described him. You see, Daniel's a man filled with the Spirit of God and the mind of Christ. You say, how could he have the mind of Christ? This was in the Old Testament. Christ was around, okay? Mind of Christ. He had the mind of Christ, the Spirit of God. Now, how is it he had the Spirit of God and the mind of Christ? Because, are you listening? Because he obeyed God, he prayed, he spent time with the Lord. He took God and his ways seriously. He feared God. And God, he'll do that to any of us. You get alone with God, get in his word and pray, open your spiritual ears. I'm telling you, there's no reason he won't pour into any of us light and insight and wisdom. He wants to do that. So Daniel's the only one they turn to when all else has failed. And as we live Christ-like lives before the world, well, they may have mocked you when times were good for them, but when the crisis hits, they turn to the man or woman of God. Did you hear me? As a pastor, I see it often. Others out doing their old party thing in their life, you know. But then, when suddenly happens in their life, the phone rings. Phone rings. We've tried the clowns aren't working. Let's go to the man of God. You know, I want to be that kind of person, don't you? And when someone's in the world and they're done with the clowns and they realize they are clowns, that they're pretenders, they can't help them. I want to be the kind of person that they say, let's go talk to, maybe she can help me. Maybe he can help me. I think they can. Where there is darkness and confusion, God brings light. And may we be that light. Daniel was. Verse 13. So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? Now think about what he's just saying here. He's basically saying, he's putting Daniel down, isn't he? Oh, you're one of the exiles. You're one of them. You're not one of us. You were captured. You were brought here. You're one of those. You are lesser. Well, interesting who he's going to for help. And isn't it interesting that this Belshazzar pretender, he could not, how is it he could not really have known about Daniel? When you think of all that we've talked about in the first 4 chapters of Daniel, how would you not have known those things that happened? Oh, he knew. But like all foolish people, Belshazzar chose to disregard knowledge. He turned his back on experience. And that is dangerous. Brother, listen to me, brother and sister, listen. God teaches us through experience, not only our own, but what we see happening in other people's lives. You want to live a life of haughtiness and pride and arrogance? We know what happens, right? Pride comes before a fall, or pride comes before... You see it. You see it. But somehow we don't think that applies to us. Don't want to hear it, don't want to see it. Won't happen to me. Belshazzar's that guy. Goodness, can you think what he had to learn from Nebuchadnezzar? After all we've read? Hasn't learned a thing. Do you ever ask yourself why it is that some people just never seem to learn? Why is it some people just never seem to learn? Verse 14. I have heard that the Spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Verse 16. Now, I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can, read this writing and tell me what it means. You'll be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom. Here we go again. I have heard that you were able. If you can. This is an attitude of skepticism in these words that Belshazzar says to Daniel. If you can really does, it reveals doubt. Contrast this to Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4, verse 18, where Nebuchadnezzar says, you can, because the Spirit of the holy gods is in you. Nebuchadnezzar didn't say, if you can, you can. You can. This guy, if you can, you exile. I've heard you're able. Verse 17. Then Daniel answered the king, you may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. I just love that line. I don't want your purple robe and I don't want your gold chain. And I'm kind of already 70-some years old and probably retired, and frankly, I don't need to be third in line in the kingdom. Especially not under someone like you. Besides, you'll be dead before the day's out anyway. So, I'm going to go ahead. It says, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. But he did it because that's what God wanted him to do. Not because he was some trained monkey that if he did a trick, he'd get a treat. No, not at all. Daniel could not be bought. He could not be manipulated. Not by this king. Not in any way. Now, before Daniel gives the message to Belshazzar, he has a lot to say. And like I said, he's probably at the age where he doesn't care anymore. I'm just going to lay it out there. So he does. Are you ready? Buckle up. Here we go. Verse 18. Your Majesty. Well, at least he had some. He didn't say live forever like everybody else. He just said, Your Majesty. The Most High God gave your father, Nebuchadnezzar, sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Gave. It came from God. And this is really the primary lesson taught throughout this entire book of Daniel. It is the Lord who gives, and it is the Lord who takes away. Whatever Nebuchadnezzar in all his glory and power, God gave it to him. Whatever good we have in this life is a gift from God. Oh, let's praise Him for it, right? Thank you, God. Don't take it for granted. Don't think it's owed to you. Don't think you're entitled. Be thankful for it. Be thankful. Well, we could go sing the last song again, couldn't we? Verse 19. Because of the high position He gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, He put to death. Those He wanted to spare, He spared. Those He wanted to promote, He promoted. And those He wanted to humble, He humbled. See, Nebuchadnezzar acted in a way as a god on the earth, with power to kill people, power to lift people up, power to do just about anything. But who gave it to him? God Almighty did. And what happened when he got arrogant? Well, Daniel's going to say, let's go to verse 20. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. Yes, indeed, not only does the Lord give, but the Lord takes away. Verse 21, he was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he looked up. Well, you remember. Good job. Until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and sets over them anyone He wishes. Has Belshazzar ever done that? No. He has not. And there we see the primary difference between Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 32 or 22. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all of this. Wow. Wow. He's talking to this man that could have him executed on the spot. But you, Belshazzar, you've not humbled yourself. And you've known all the stuff that your father Nebuchadnezzar knew and learned and submitted to the sovereignty of God Almighty. And not you. You got the enemy outside your walls, and you're having a big old party and trying to impress people, and you're drinking from the goblets, from the temple of God? Whew. Belshazzar's ignorance was willful. He knew. He just refused to recognize. Let's go on, verse 23. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from His temple brought to you and your nobles, your wives and your concubines, drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in His hand your life and all your ways. Therefore, where are we? We got the right one there? Oh, yes, we do. But you did not honor the God who holds in His hand your life and all your ways. Therefore, He sent the hand that wrote the inscription. Daniel calls it just as it is. Belshazzar's willful ignorance and pride placed him in a position of opposition to the Lord of heaven. Think of it. You know what? Things do not go well and certainly do not end well when we do not honor the God who holds in His hand our life and all our days. Verse 25. Instead, where am I here? I'm getting lost. Oh, there, okay. Instead, you've set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. Okay, so I've read, go to verse 25. But this is the inscription that was written. Many, many tekel parson. Now, those are real words. They're Aramaic. They're written in Aramaic. And they have to do with money. All right? Many, many is twice because that was just a way of emphasizing it. Tekel is another piece of money. Have you ever heard of a shekel? Okay? So a smaller part of money than the tekel, and then the parson, which means a division of the money. It doesn't matter. They looked at it and it didn't make any sense to them. Right? It wasn't the words didn't mean something to them. It's that so what? If I hand wrote on that wall, nickel, dime, quarter. Oh, I know, nickel, nickel, dime, quarter. What are you going to do with that? Right? They didn't know what to do with it. And so Daniel is going to be called in, and here's what he says, verse 26. Here's what these words mean. Many, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. You know what? What we believe we have an endless supply of, we waste. You and I do not have an endless supply of days. Fools don't understand that, or they ignore it. When you realize that indeed we don't have an endless supply of days, we don't waste them. But God had numbered this king's days. I'm going to bring this to an end. Tekel, verse 27. You've been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Wow. You picture scales with me? They go like this. You with me? Okay? This is the mess Belshazzar is down here. And whatever he's trying to put up here, just ain't getting it. By the way, this is you, and this is me. These are my sins. There's not one thing I can put on the other side of that scale that's going to do this. You with me? You have got to get, you've been weighed and found wanting. How am I going to prevent that? How am I going to not have that in my life? What's the only thing that's heavy enough to do this? It's the blood of Christ. And yes, our days are numbered. But I don't know about you. I'm looking around here. I think we're all breathing in and out here. Some of us are more awake than others, but we're breathing in and out. That means that it hadn't come to an end yet. That means that the blood of Christ, which is right here, available. If we repent and we say, oh God, save me. Nothing I can possibly do is going to cause those scales to move, except to just come to you and plead, God, the blood of Christ over my life. God, have mercy. Help me. Perez, verse 28, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Verse 29, then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, a gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. He got it, whether he wanted it or not. Verse 30, that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Do you know how they got in the gates? It was impenetrable. There's no way you could get through the walls and the gates of Babylon. They were so secure. That's why they could party and have a good time. You know what the Persians and the Medes did? They dried up the Euphrates River. Well, they didn't dry it up. They diverted it. They built a thing that caused it to go a different direction, because this city was supplied by that river, their water. So the water flowed, and they had it a way so it could come up under, and they didn't have to worry about a siege because they'd have an endless supply of water because the river flowed right in. Plus, it was a big enough city. They had their own farms and animals in there. I mean, you could live for years in here with armies outside. You'll be all right. But when they diverted that water, those tunnels that brought in the water, the Medes and the Persians walked right underneath the walls using those dried up tunnels. And that very night, I think it was 589 BC, if you want to date, he would be killed. And Babylon would be destroyed. Not destroyed, taken over by the Medes and the Persians. And by the way, Daniel will become also influential in that kingdom as well. He will not be slain. You see, when God judges, as he judged Belshazzar, he was doing the right thing. And when he shows compassion, he's doing the right thing as well. Judgment is one side and mercy is the other of God's righteousness. Sometimes we get that confused. We have this crazy idea that it's all mercy. It's all just mercy, mercy, mercy. Do you understand what I just said? I know it's getting late, but I don't want you to miss it. God's righteousness, there's two sides of that coin. One is mercy, and the other is judgment. Right? Right now is a day of mercy. Today is the day of salvation.